Whether you're a fan of the winter or not, we're coming up on winter 2024 to 2025 pretty fast, and you're probably wondering what's going to happen. So we're in between two forecasts right now. We had our first forecast, that's our first preliminary forecast that we posted about 3 weeks ago, and now we have our middle ground, which we're posting today. And then we have our official forecast, which is about a month from now. So we're kind of filling in here. We're trying to see what's changed, what's stayed the same, and are we staying on track with our forecast? All coming up in today's video. Now, before we get started in today's video, I do want to ask you to keep all comments down below respectful. Any hateful comments I will be removing, and you will be blocked permanently on the channel. Now, also, I do want to list that we're going to be going into two different patterns. Now, for the sake of this forecast video, I do only want to go into the two because of time. But I do want to let you know and reassure you that I have gone into many, many more weather patterns that typically coincide to form what we see in our winter season. So there's a lot more that's gone into this forecast behind the scenes than what you're going to be seeing in this video. But just for time, we're going to be going over the La Niña pattern and the NAO index. Now, starting off here with the La Niña, you can notice that for a winter season with La Niña, let alone any other patterns, this is just straight La Niña, we typically see cooler conditions for much of the northern United States and warmer conditions for the south. We also see wetter conditions for much of the Pacific Northwest and wetter conditions for much of the Ohio Valley. And then we also see a drier region for the southern United States. Now you may be wondering, why is this? Well, do you see that thin blue line in the middle of your screen there? Well, that is called the jet stream. And I'm sure you've heard of it before, whether your meteorologist was talking about it or if you've seen it in your earth sciences class. This is what's keeping as a boundary here. And we see this is a flowing column of air that's locking in the warmer conditions to the south and those cooler conditions to the north. Now, this column of air doesn't stay stationary, and it will fluctuate. It will trough in the west sometimes, it will ridge in the east sometimes. And if you don't know what those are, troughing is the dip there, and the ridging is the peak. So we see here, typically in a La Niña pattern, we see typical ridging in the west, and we see some typical troughing in the east. So this is kind of what stays pretty consistent throughout the winter season, and this is likely where we're headed this winter season. We're already kind of in that La Niña pattern there. We've faded from El Niño, which was last winter and much of the 2024 season, and now we're headed back into La Niña once again, and this is likely what we will be seeing this winter. But we can't just go by this. We have other indexes that we're going to be going into, but one of the most significant that I want to cover in today's video on top of this is the NAO index. Now, the NAO index, or the North Atlantic Oscillation, typically revolves around the Atlantic Ocean. And what we want to focus on for this video is the United States. Now, this year, we are expecting a negative NAO to remain fairly consistent throughout this season. Now, I do believe that at times we could head back towards a neutral pattern, and maybe even once or twice we could dabble in a positive NAO. This does fluctuate pretty frequently, but I do believe for the most part we're going to be staying pretty negative with our pattern here. And typically with a negative NAO pattern, this is what you see. You see troughing in much of the eastern United States, keeping a lot of those north central United States cooler, and you can see in that blue region defined by the cooler air, that's what you're expecting with this type of pattern. And we also see for much of the west and the south, we see warmer conditions, that warmer air being locked in, and that's what we see typically with a negative NAO pattern. So if we take what we just learned with La Niña and we put this with that, you can see these are pretty similar, right? Well, this reassures us and kind of gives us more confidence as to what we're expecting with that pattern. Okay, we're expecting cooler conditions for a lot of that northern area right there, and a lot of those southern areas are expecting those warmer conditions. Now, let's go ahead and put what we've just learned into our forecast. Now, the first map of our forecast that I want to go over with you in today's video is our temperature anomaly forecast map. Now, this map is going to tell you the difference in temperature that you're expecting to see this season. So I want you to focus on the light blue region here up for the north. Now, this indicates a slightly below average change in your temperatures. Now, when we talk about any slight changes, we aren't going to talk about you're going to walk outside and say, hey, it's a lot cooler, or hey, it's a lot warmer. This is a slight change, but it is a notable change because it can still affect your weather. So overall, you're not going to really notice too many frostier changes to your pattern if you're in this light blue region. You may notice at times it's a little bit chillier, but it's not going to be too much of a major impact on your weather. Now we head to the dark blue region, and this is where things get a little chillier. Okay, this is where things get pretty cold with those Arctic air masses that we will mention on later in our overall forecast map. Now, what you can see here is this dark blue region includes much of the Midwest and the Great Lakes. And this area is going to get pretty chilly this winter. A lot of times we're going to see some deep plunges from the Arctic air masses, and that's pretty typical when you combine a negative NAO pattern with a La Niña. So we're going to see some pretty beefy cold air masses moving down to this area, and I do believe that's going to keep things pretty chilly for this winter season. Now moving on to the south, we don't see any above average areas, we only see a slightly above average area. And this is because I do believe that overall we're not going to see too much of that heat building, okay? It's still going to be pretty warm for much of the southwest, but I do believe overall for much of the southern United States, we're just going to see that warmer air locking in, maybe holding on to some slightly above average conditions, but nothing too extreme down there heat-wise. Now moving on to our next forecast map here, we're taking a look at our precipitation anomaly forecast map. Now, like the temperature anomaly forecast map, this is going to tell you the changes, but this one is for precipitation. So we're going to start off in the Pacific Northwest here, where you can see that light green region there. That indicates some slightly above average precipitation there for the Pacific Northwest. So a slight increase in your overall precipitation. It's not like you're going to go outside and notice a ton of snowfall increase more in this region, and you're not really going to notice a ton more rainfall either. So overall precipitation is just going to be increased slightly in the positive direction. Now, for that eastern region there, we expect the same thing. So for that light green region, this is going to be your slightly increased region here. Nothing too crazy, nothing too out of the ordinary, just a little bit increased for that area. Now back to the Pacific Northwest, we see that green region, this darker green region. That is your above average precipitation expected. So basically what you're expecting is a lot more rainfall, a lot more snowfall, depending on what the temperature range is there, a lot more precipitation overall, and that might affect your winter season too, because obviously if you live in those higher elevations or areas that typically see snowfall, you're going to be seeing a lot more snowfall than what you would typically expect in your winter season, thus changing those snowfall totals. Now the same can be said over here for much of the Great Lakes and even northeastern United States there. We see in that dark green region, that is your above average precipitation. This is also contributed from my expectation on high lake effect yields this season. We're seeing a lot more warmer lakes, and we're seeing some cooler air expected to move over those lakes. So combine those two factors, we see a higher likelihood of higher yields of lake effect snowfall, thus increasing your precipitation for some of those areas that typically expect that lake effect yield. Now we also are expecting a busy storm track through this area as well. So not only do we have that lake effect snowfall in play, but we also have some pretty active storm patterns bringing a lot of that precipitation through this region, thus creating a higher than normal precipitation yield. Now for the southern United States there, you can see that yellowish region. This is your slightly decreased precipitation. You're not really expecting too much there, just a slight decrease overall. So it's not like you're going to go through a major drought or anything like that. We're just expecting some slightly decreased precipitation due to the storm track being moved further north. Now, our final region on this map is that dark brown region there. You can see that's kind of a pretty nasty looking region, and it's probably going to feel that way too. Pretty dry down there. Not a lot of precipitation expected there along the Texas-Mexico border and the New Mexico border there. We're expecting a lot of those areas to be fairly dry there. Not a lot of precipitation going on there, just because a lot of high pressure is expected to build down there and keeping things pretty much further north precipitation-wise, and keeping less storm tracks out of that area. Now, combining all of what we just talked about in today's video, we're going to put this into one forecast map, and this is our overall forecast map. Now, what this is showing you is basically a summary of the type of weather that you're most likely to see during your winter season. So pretty much the most frequent type of weather, or the most standing out type of weather that you can expect to see this winter. So we're going to start up here for the Pacific Northwest there, cold and wet. So as we talked about, a pretty active jet stream. It's going to be fairly cooler up there in some portions of the Pacific Northwest. Obviously towards the Pacific coastline, it may be a little bit warmer there, as we talked about due to the jet stream. But generally overall cooler because it's winter. We're expecting cold and wet conditions, busy storm track, definitely going to keep things pretty chilly and wet for those areas. Now moving to the south, we see that yellow mild region. This is going to be a flip-flop between the southern region and the northern region. I think for the most part, a lot of storm systems are going to stay out of this area. Obviously, you might see a few storm systems this winter move through, and they might be even pretty significant at that. More or less some heavy snowfall, depending on what type of systems you get through there. But overall, I think it's going to be more of a mild winter for you guys in this area. Now, moving to the south there, we see the entire southern United States is in that warmer region there. So anywhere from California all the way over to even portions of the Northeast, we see a giant warmer region. Now, this is expected because of the jet stream. Again, we're saying that warmer air is going to be locked further south, and even due to the warming of the Atlantic, we are expecting some warming along the Atlantic coastline. That's going to keep things fairly warmer for those coastal areas, especially up in the Northeast around New York and those areas up there. So we are expecting warmer conditions for this region. Now, it's not going to be 85 during your winter season if you're up in New York City. Obviously, if you're down in Florida, that's a possibility, but it's not going to be significantly warmer up in the Northeast. All we're saying is it's going to be a little bit warmer than what you typically expect for your winter season. Now, moving just up north a little bit, we see that light blue region, occasional storms. I've highlighted this region here in this color because basically it's signifying that you have a pretty decent chance, okay? It's not like you're not going to see tons of storm systems, but if we keep that storm track further north, up for those far northern areas where we are expecting them to stay, that will likely keep things pretty inactive for you guys at times. But then we are expecting those deep troughs to come through, and I do believe those will bring some pretty decent storms through this area, so occasional storms seems pretty suitable for you guys. Now moving north, we see that frosty region. Now I had someone mention to me, why didn't you name this the Arctic blast region? And typically I don't like to use that lingo. It is an actual meteorological term, but I don't really like to dub this region an Arctic blast region. So you can consider it that because we are expecting those deeper cold downs to move through, but I figured frosty is a pretty reasonable statement. It's going to be very cold in this region. Okay, we're going to see a lot of those Arctic air masses plunge down into this purple region here, and it's going to keep things pretty chilly. We're talking sub-zero temperatures at times, often, and it's really going to be very chilly in this area. So frosty is a pretty reasonable statement for this region. Now for the blue region to the east, we see snowy. This is pretty suitable. We're going to see a very active storm track move through this area, and obviously because it's winter, we're going to see a lot of snowy conditions, and on top of that we see the lake effect there that I am expecting above average lake effect snowfall for the Great Lakes. So we are seeing that potential for very snowy patterns for this blue region. So if you are a snowfall lover, keep in mind this is likely what you can see this winter. Now moving a little bit further south to the pink region, this is in portions of the Mid-Atlantic and Ohio Valley. This is your mixed region. Now this is kind of back and forth, and it's a little bit hard because this area can either be warm and humid like the south, or it can be frigid and chilly like the north. So it's a kind of a little battle zone, to be honest. And this is kind of an area that's typically hard to predict for the winter season. So a lot of people typically put this region in zones such as the winter battle zone or maybe the flip-flop region, but I think mixed is a pretty good name to call it. It may be rainy at times, it may be snowy at times. We may see some mixed precipitation. It's going to be a little bit all over, so it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but I think overall you'll have a cooler winter due to that jet stream, but I think for the most part your precipitation wise will be a little back and forth. Now in our red region there, you see the severe weather late region, and WX is just an abbreviation that we use in the meteorological community for weather, so keep that in mind. So severe weather late. Now you may be wondering, what does this mean? Where does the late come from? Well, in the early stages of winter, we're not expecting severe weather. So you're going to be a part of that warmer region to the south right there. You're going to be a part of that orange region there for much of your winter season. Now, come time around February, we're talking maybe mid-February or so, that's where we're going to start to see the switch, okay? So we're talking about later winter. So you're going to be in that warmer pattern until later winter, and then we see severe weather late. That's where this starts to kick in, and I do believe that heading into spring, so late winter, earlier spring, we're going to see the severe weather pattern pick up for much of the Dixie Alley region, which is that area down south there. And we could even see some pretty active severe weather patterns down here. This is pretty typical for the type of pattern we're seeing set up. Now, it's not set in stone right now, but as of our previous forecast, this region is staying here, and I do believe we will see it in our official forecast as well. I'm pretty confident on this happening later on in the winter. But I do want you to keep in mind, if you live in this region, this doesn't mean you're going to be seeing nasty tornado outbreaks. This doesn't mean you're going to see devastating severe weather. I never want to put that out there. This is basically saying you're going to see some pretty stormy conditions come February. Doesn't mean anything's going to be dangerous or damaging, just means some pretty stormy conditions could head through there. Some of those storms could be severe. So any severe weather that's happening late winter, I do believe it's going to be happening around this region. Now moving on to our final region on this forecast map, this is the shots at storms, okay? And you may be wondering, okay, what does that mean? Isn't that similar to the occasional storms region? Yes, but in this region, I do believe you're going to see some more storms than the occasional storms region, okay? Because you see the storm tracks are moving down south through that snowier region, where we are expecting the active storm track to be. And I do believe that's going to continue on into this region. Now, whether or not you'll see frequent storms in this area, depending on which direction the track is, it could be headed northeast ahead of you guys, north of you guys, and you might not see anything. But I do believe oftentimes you will see those tracks into the northeast and into the Ohio Valley, for which this region is highlighted, and I do believe that that's what you could see this winter, some pretty decent shots at some storms. Alright, I want to thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you did enjoy this video, I ask that you consider subscribing for more US forecasts free of charge, and I also ask that you consider liking the Weather at a Glance official Facebook page for more inside information and complimentary personal forecasts when you message me on my Facebook page. I want to give a huge shout out to our channel members, Chris, Betty. If you want to be up on this page right here, all you have to do is go down to the join button It's a giant button right there that says join right next to the subscribe, and you can also get your name there for a small monthly fee. It helps me out, and you get to have your name up there and get a shout out in every video that I make. And with that, I will see you in the next video.